No. Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the first session of the Open Book Festival. I'm very honored to be chairing this panel with three remarkable writers and thinkers who I'm going to start by asking them some questions about their books and introducing them. And then I hope that we'll open it up to a conversation. I know that sometimes this conversation can get very heated, so I'm going to ask people to please ask questions in a respectful way and listen in a tolerant and open-minded way, and to just be, a little bit, not to be hardline, and we won't. One thing that we will not tolerate is any kind of prejudice against people. But the writers have got huge experience between them, and they've taken very strong stands, some of them, like Megan. So let me introduce them and start. And these are the books. I'm sure that you can get them. You can get them here or at the book lounge. And I'm going to start with Haidar, who's a Palestinian professor, who's at the moment living in Johannesburg. His university, he tells me, Al-Aqsa in Gaza, doesn't exist anymore. It's been bombed to the ground, so he's here decolonizing the Palestinian mind, which is a very interesting political analysis on what some of the solutions should be in Palestine. And then next to him is Megan Choritz, who's written a really lovely book called Lost Property. It's not about Israel and Palestine, but it is very much about South Africa and the kind of moral questions that face us here. Is partly part of growing up in South Africa. But she's better known as South African Jews for a Free Palestine representative who has been very outspoken in all sorts of forums about the necessity to free Palestine and a voice against what has been described as a genocide that is going on in Gaza and against the Palestinians at the moment. And then on my far left is Nathi Ngubane, a cartoonist and an illustrator who's done this lovely little book, From the River to the Sea, which in itself it's a colouring in book for children, but it is extraordinary because it's got the whole history of Palestine in. And some of you who read the newspaper or news publications might recall that at one point one of the big bookstore chains took it off the shelves amid some protest, except for the book lounge, we're happy to say, which is sponsoring this festival, who kept it on. So let me ask by starting with you, Haidar. In your book, one of the things that you are most outspoken about, is the Oslo Accords and why they were a mistake in the first place. I notice the politicians today talk about going back to the Oslo Accords and how that might solve some of the incredible violence that's going on. But you write and analyze quite strongly against them. Can you explain what is behind that?
Yeah, thank you so much. I think it's very important for people to understand that the utter failure of the Oslo Accord is because it refused to deal with the Palestinian people's right to self-determination. In other words, it refused to deal with the basic rights of the Palestinian people, their right to freedom, their right to equality, and their right to justice. And the Oslo Accords ultimately led to what you in South Africa were opposed to. I mean, the Bantustanization of Palestine. In South Africa, you fought against the Bantustan system, and what the Oslo Accords ended up with is the creation of 3 Bantustans in the West Bank, and ultimately leading to the establishment of a concentration camp in the Gaza Strip. I'm from Gaza. I was born in Gaza. I was born in a refugee camp, in the Nusayrat refugee camp. I spent, the first 20 years of my life there. And I never imagined myself, leaving Gaza and experiencing the freedom of movement outside of Gaza. I have not been allowed to visit the West Bank. I mean, most South Africans, Muslim South Africans I meet here in South Africa tell me about, going to Jerusalem, visiting Al-Aqsa Mosque, spending some time there. I'm not allowed to do that. And I haven't been allowed to do that since 1989. My sister, for example, lives in Bethlehem. I have not been able to see my sister since 2000. She has not been able to visit us in Gaza. But what happened in 2005 is that the Palestinian people, when they were asked to go to the polling station and vote for their representative in the Legislative Council, representing only the Palestinians of the Gaza Strip and the West Bank, they voted against the Oslo Accords. January 2000. They voted against the two-state solution, which is a racist solution par excellence. And this is why the apartheid Israel, in cahoot with reactionary Arab regimes and the colonial West, decided to impose a deadly siege on Gaza. Without the Oslo Accords, the international community would not have ended up imposing a deadly siege on Gaza, leading to the ongoing genocide right now, where we have lost more than 40,000 people, including, by the way, more than 50 of my relatives, more than 20 of my own students, more than 10 of my colleagues. So I wanted to understand what is happening right now in Gaza within the context of the Oslo Accords. You cannot separate the Oslo Accords from the ongoing genocide right now in Gaza.
Thank you very much. I just want to stay with you for a minute and follow up on something that you said about the siege of Gaza. This is what you were talking about before October the 7th last year and the happenings of Hamas. Could you just describe what you mean by a siege of Gaza?
Yeah, this blockade, as I said to you, in January 2006, after the destruction of Iraq by the Americans, George Bush wanted or claimed at the time that he wanted to spread the usual colonial, stereotypes, etc., etc. So they asked the Palestinians of the Gaza Strip and the West Bank to vote for their representatives in the Legislative Council. And when people, as I said, voted against the two-state solution, against what was expected of them to vote for, that is to say, the secular right wing leading the PLO and the Palestinian Authority at the time, the apartheid Israel with the Americans decided to impose a deadly siege on the Gaza Strip. We are talking about 360 square kilometers, by the way. The population of Gaza, people don't know that. Gaza is the most densely populated area on earth. You have 2.3 million people living within that limited area. We couldn't move. We couldn't move at all. There were times when I wanted to buy milk for my kids, and I couldn't. I couldn't find milk. Cows for beef. We were not allowed to have cigarettes, chocolate, even clean water. 97% of Gaza's water is undrinkable, polluted, and you name it. And as if that was not enough, that started in 2006. As if that was not enough, on the 27th of December 2008, apartheid Israel decided to launch a massive attack the Gaza Strip for 18 days, leaving more than 1,200 people for 18 days. And if that was not enough, they decided to do the same thing in 2012, and again for 51 days in 2014, and again in 2021, leading to 2023. Of course, people were fed up. People were fed up. We couldn't move at all. We couldn't leave Gaza. People couldn't come, and visit Gaza. We didn't have enough food. We didn't have clean water, etc., leading ultimately to what happened on the 7th of October.
So let me go to because I think your history is quite important there. Let me just go to Nathi. I'll come back to you. Nathi, your book is a history. It's a children's coloring book, but it's actually a history of Palestine from 1948 or before, where you describe the Nakba, and then afterwards what some of the things that Haidar has spoken about, the apartheid system in Israel. And Palestine, what inspired you to do this? What was your interest coming from Soweto, where you do?
Well, since 2019, my cartoons, because I'm a cartoonist as well, have been focused on human rights. So, just to give you a bit of a background, in 2020 during COVID, I wrote a book called Duma Says Wash Your Hands, Wear a Mask, that teaches kids how to stay safe during COVID. But the book was also aimed at children, or told a story about children who are living in informal settlement in South Africa, which I come from as well. So this then gave me like inspiration to continue creating books that will educate kids about what is happening around them. And this book really came about after the ICJ case in the beginning of this year, in January. So the weekend of the 25th of January, I contacted my good friend and publisher, Azad Issa, and I said to him, what can we do to tell the story of Palestine? And because I felt the pride of our lawyers that approached ICJ. And we wanted this book to not only just be a coloring book, but also be a gateway into Palestine. So when children color, they can also learn about the Nakba. They can learn about the occupation. They can learn about what it means to be in solidarity. And being a human rights activist, as well as an illustrator, I felt that it was my responsibility as an artist to actually continue the work of educating kids and teaching kids about political education. And so here we are with my coloring book.
Thank you very much, Nathi. Megan, your book is a wonderful book, but it's not about Palestine. But and we will talk about it before we get off the platform, but it's a really great book. Congratulations.
Thank you.
I want to ask you about, you have been a very public voice against, ever since this latest spate of unlimited attacks on Gaza has started. And you've spoken at St. George's Cathedral, and you've spoken on public platforms, and you've spoken on social media. What has made you do it? What has made you, as a Jewish person, take the stance that you've taken?
It's unavoidable. I mean, I think that it's quite simply a case of having to stand up and be shocked, horrified, and then try and be an ally. I don't know how else to answer that.
And what has been the reaction from your peers from Cape Town, both Jewish and non-Jewish in Cape Town?
From my peers,
Yeah.
fantastic response.
Okay.
So much support. And in fact, support from a growing community of people who share an anti-Zionist stance.
You've spoken a bit about the harassment that you've suffered as a result of the stance you've taken. Can you just expand on that a bit and what it's meant to you?
The kind of harassment that I've experienced has been of a personal kind, people leaving one-star reviews on my book and calling themselves...
Which is not about Palestine, after all.
Calling themselves Am Israel Chai, which means long live the state of Israel. And so the kind of harassment has been kind of quite sort of backhanded and ridiculous.
Thank you very much. I'm going to open to questions from the audience, by the way, in about 15 minutes, at about 10:30 or so, for half an hour. But I'm just going to carry on for the moment to ask some of them. I know one of the things you told me before we started was that your university in Gaza has been bombed completely.
That's correct, yeah. 11, yeah. This is part of what the Palestinian scholar Karman Abulsi calls scholasticized. 11 universities. We have 11 universities and higher education institutions. They have been completely destroyed, and more than 600 schools. My university has two beautiful campuses, one in Gaza City where I live, and one in Khan Yunis. Both have been destroyed. The Islamic University has been destroyed, Al-Quds Open University, Al-Azhar University, Al-Ummah University, etc. All universities have been completely destroyed. And this is part of and parcel of the ongoing genocide. I mean, even if 2 or 3 Palestinians are left to survive in Gaza, apartheid Israel wants to make sure that the infrastructure is completely destroyed and nobody can use the existing infrastructure. Almost all public hospitals have also been destroyed. Journalists have been targeted. Many of my, as I said, colleagues and even activists, the late Rifat Al-Arair is a personal friend of mine. He was threatened more than once. He kept receiving threatening messages, etc., until he was killed together with his family. And last month, his daughter also was targeted. So they don't only target activists, but also their families. I myself have been displaced 4 times. On the 9th of October, I was contacted by an intelligence officer, and I was asked to leave immediately. I live
An Israeli intelligence
yes,
officer.
an Israeli intelligence officer. I live on the 10th floor of a residential tower, together with my small family, my 2 little kids and my wife. We didn't have enough time. Luckily, you know, I don't know, I was prepared for that, and that's why I prepared my passports and identity cards, and I left with my T-shirt. And the whole neighborhood that night was destroyed, was attacked. You know, carpet bombing. I stayed with the opposite neighbor. You know, a street separates my neighborhood from Tel El-Hawa neighborhood, and I stayed with my neighbor. And the following day, I moved to the north to stay with my brother. 3 days after that, the same scenario was repeated. And we had to leave Sheikh Radwan in the north, Sheikh Radwan in the north. And then I moved to Rafah, where I stayed until early December, when I was contacted by the South African embassy in Ramallah and the embassy in, because I have a South African passport. I mean, privileged, you know, to have a South African passport. And they managed to evacuate us on the 5th of December. So I've been, this is my 4th displacement, in fact. Yeah, and here I am here in South Africa. And even when people keep asking me, are you going? Of course we will return. Not only to Gaza, even to the original village from which my parents come from in 1948.
How did you get out on the 5th of December? I mean, just describe that for us.
Yeah. I was staying together with 9 other families in one flat. Yeah, my sister and other families. And in fact, I'm not saying this because I'm not using here emotive language. I'm just describing what exactly happened as a witness. My next book is The Gaza Witness, where I talk about my experience, etc., etc. And I'm supposed to be dead. And I mean it. I mean, more than once, from one house to another house, moving to 3rd house. All the houses where I stayed have been destroyed. I was on the phone with one of my former students. He was an activist, a BDS activist. And 3 hours before he was assassinated, together with his wife, who was also my student, together with 2 little children and their families, 9 of them. I was speaking to him on the phone. 3 hours after that, the house was targeted and the whole family, the entire family was killed. And that made me, you know, you start raising existential questions. I mean, you can't avoid. I mean, I'm not blaming anybody. The blame is very clear where the blame falls here. But you know, when the next house gets destroyed, and then you know the people who are under the rubble, the most hated word in Gaza right now is anqad. In Arabic, it means rubble. Rubble. The other word is ashla, shredded bodies. Then you go to visit the rubble, and you know that there are people still under. I mean, today in the morning, I got a message from one of my students talking about the anqad of her house. And then the following day, you find out Hussam is still under the rubble. And the body is still, or the family would tell you that the body remained under the rubble for more than 15 days. more than 11 people are still under the rubble. 11,000 people are still under the rubble. So that makes you raise questions. Should you stay, or if you can leave, would you, if you are given the opportunity? In the previous 4 massacres, the embassy contacted me and I refused to leave as a matter of principle. But I didn't have children at the time. Now I looked at their eyes, and the answer was, well, they don't have a choice. And if I can save their lives, let me do that. And this is how I decided to leave, with the help of the South African embassy.
And your sister in the West Bank, because I see there have been invasions in the West Bank.
Yeah. She's based in Bethlehem, not in Jenin. My other family, my brother and my sister, also they had to leave Rafah. And now they are staying in an area north of Khan Yunis called Al-Mawasi, in a tent.
Okay.
In a tent. And they have been staying in that tent for 1.5 months.
Gee.
Yeah.
Okay. Nathi, your book, I mean, we've heard some of the eyewitness accounts about what it's been like recently and how horrific it is. But your book was apparently, reportedly, taken off the shelves of some bookshop, of a chain of bookstores at one point. Not all of them, admittedly, but some of them. How did you feel about that? And
Well, I mean, living in South Africa, I would like to think that we live in a democracy and we have freedom of expression. And when I heard that Exclusive Books was taking some of the books down from the shelf, I felt that my rights were being trampled upon. And it just made me think, are we not allowed to have Palestinian content on the bookshelves? Can't we agree to disagree? Don't we live in a democracy? So I was quite, I was quite upset by that. And Exclusive Books then put out a statement saying that they do not censor or approve books. And another statement was, after carefully reviewing the content of this book, we found it not to be offensive, so therefore we've put it back on the shelves. So which one is the right one? So, but I am happy though that the books have been reinstated. And I feel that it's important for the little ones to learn about the world around them. And what I also had in mind when I created this book is to teach activism. And it should always come at a young age. And once children get older, then it becomes second nature to be an activist, to defend other people's human rights and to stand for those that are not represented. And here we are.
I want to ask Megan a question, given her activism and the role she's played. Somebody remarked to me the other day, a therapist actually, not mine, I don't have one, but somebody I walk with, who said that the extent of intergenerational trauma in both Palestine and Israel is so profound that so you've got a generation coming out of Europe and the Holocaust, and then you've got what happened in Palestine since 1948, that it's one of the most difficult problems to confront. Do you think that that's true? Do you get a sense of the reaction you get from people who've had roots in European Jewry, of intergenerational trauma that has impacted on Palestine in such a negative way?
I don't know that I'm best placed to answer that question, but I definitely think that there is intergenerational trauma, but I don't know of a group of people who haven't suffered intergenerational trauma. I mean, I think that is the state of our world, and that is the state of how the world works. I think that anyone can go back to some form of intergenerational trauma. I think it's how we manage it and how we and who we become with that information. And so, as a white South African Jew who grew up under apartheid, I I have I have grandparents who fled Eastern Europe. I have family currently in Israel. All of these are players, but what's similar in every intergenerational trauma is the trauma and the terrible things that people and countries and dominators do to oppressed people. That's the common, and that must be stood against.
But there's still degrees of trauma, right? So there's a degree of the Holocaust on that happened before, and then what's happening in Palestine now, because there's a difference between discrimination and genocide, right? You would agree.
I don't know.
There's a difference between oppression and genocide, because what happened on both sides is actually, it seems to me, a targeting of people for who they are to get rid of them, both Jews and, from what Haidar says, Palestinians as well. A kind of visceral hatred of who you are because of what you are.
I don't know. I don't know. I think visceral hatred is a kind of weird excuse for things.
Yeah. Yes.
I don't think that necessarily makes sense. I think visceral hatred is a fantastic excuse for colonialism. I think it's a wonderful excuse for any genocide, and I think I don't think it has any value.
Haidar, what do you think that there is? Where do you see political solutions coming from?
Well, what we've been offered is so far, since early or mid-70s, is a racist solution, in fact. Separating between, people in Palestine based on their ethno-religious background. I don't know, I'm sure some of the people, our friends here and comrades know very well that Israel does not have a constitution. Israel has basic laws. And Israel, according to the nation-state law, for example, 2017, defines itself as the state of Jews only. So if you are born to a Jewish mother in South Africa, you have the right to citizenship upon arrival in Israel. And I'm saying this because we are dealing here with facts. I'm not telling you, about my opinion. Where does that leave Palestinians? Coming back to your question to Megan. Palestinians have been, their existence has been completely denied. They don't exist. After 1967, Golda Meir, the Prime Minister of Israel, when she was asked about Palestinians, he said, well, there is no such thing as Palestinians. They don't exist. And I think, you start, committing a genocide by first dehumanizing the other. And this is what has been going on to us in Palestine in general, and to the Palestinians of Gaza in particular, dehumanize them, and then when you kill them, you don't feel anything. And therefore, the question of the solution, what is the solution? Racist solutions, they don't survive. You South Africans of all people know what I'm talking about. You were offered Bantustans. So I would say, as I argue in my book, based on the legacy of the likes of Edward Said, Ghassan Kanafani, even Steve Biko, Frantz Fanon, Amilcar Cabral, one state. One person, one vote in Palestine between the Jordan River and the Mediterranean, a secular democratic state. Because what you have right now, according to Amnesty International, according to human rights, according to Israel's mainstream human rights organization, Beit Salem, you have an apartheid system. Yes, between the Jordan River and the Mediterranean. The alternative is a secular democratic state for all of its citizens, regardless of race, regardless of ethnicity, and regardless of religion.
So that is so interesting, because I think for us here, that's one of the first times we've heard that said. And it seems the obvious solution, because in South Africa, exactly as you say, and you compare in your book, that we had Bantustans which were meant to accommodate
True.
black people who had to come into town anyway to work, but under stringent conditions. But to talk, and in fact the solution in South Africa was exactly that. The Bantustans collapsed. I mean, they had no legitimacy from the beginning almost. But do they have, why do these so-called, these sort of separate Palestinian areas then have international credence in your view? Because it seems that people have accepted the two-state solution as part of where you go, of the road you walk down.
Right. What's the title of my book? Decolonizing the Palestinian
Yes,
mind.
exactly.
And that is the answer, in fact.
Yeah.
You know, people have been, convinced that the only solution is to separate Palestinians, Christians and Muslims, from Israeli Jews. And, billions of dollars have been poured into that solution. Propaganda. The Americans support it, in theory. The colonial West supports it, theoretically. But at the same time, Israel has taken every single step to make the establishment of a sovereign, independent Palestinian state impossible. Now you tell me, Israel, I tell you, in 1993, the number of Jewish settlers in the Gaza Strip and the West Bank was 193,000. That was when the Oslo Accords were signed. Now the number of Jewish settlers, settlements, colonies for Jews only, is more than 750,000. Wow. So where are they going to go if you have an independent Palestinian state? The Gaza Strip has been turned into an extermination camp. Where are the Palestinians supposed to have their own independent Palestinian state? Then you have 40% of the land of the West Bank getting annexed to apartheid Israel, leaving us with what? With less than 12% of historic Palestine, where you cannot have an independent state. And therefore, reality, facts on the ground tell you that there is only one state, and that state has to be a state for all of its citizens.
Nathi, it sounds a lot like, the 12% sounds a lot like what happened here, right? Where 13% of the land under the Native Land Acts was allocated to black people in terms of the homelands, but the homelands never had any credibility with most people. I was going to say most African people, but with most people in the country. Do you see that this is a Bantustan type solution, as Haidar says?
I was born right after apartheid in South Africa, and I've heard stories from my grandparents and my parents about their struggles during apartheid in South Africa. And with this coloring book, really, I wanted to show the common struggle that Palestinians have, and the common struggle that they share with South Africa. And I wanted to also highlight, colonialism, oppression, and to show that people who were born in their own ancestral land, they deserve to live freely in their land without restrictions. And this is what this book, I want to continue to educate the young ones.
So I'm so interested that you referenced your own experience and your grandparents and how you found that resonance. So I'm going to ask you one more question, but I'm going to ask Megan to speak briefly, because we haven't spoken about your book, which I think is great. And it's about the same thing. It's about growing up. You speak in the book about the character, the main character's kind of conscience about the domestic helper who's in the house and how important she is for this character, but how you feel at times the main character has betrayed her. Growing up with in white South Africa with a conscience and an awareness that grows in you of what's going on, does that have resonance for you with what is happening in Israel and Palestine? The way you describe, the way you tell your story of being white, Jewish, middle class.
Absolutely. I mean, I think that the invisibilization of people who are, I mean, in South Africa, it was cognitive dissonance, where you literally had people who were in your house, but they didn't exist. They were there, but they didn't have lives. And I think in a weird kind of way, I imagine that must be what it's like for a Palestinian inside of the borders of Israel, is that they literally don't exist. They're the same kind of second-class citizen. So I think that when you start realizing that actually people are human, you have to understand the problem better.
And in fact, the way, I mean, so we grew up in more or less, I think I'm a bit older than you, the same generation, but I do remember police vans coming into white areas and pass raids and domestic workers running for, being afraid and running for safety. And you describe a lot of that, that feeling of what it is like to be a domestic, having been in the middle of apartheid, a domestic worker in a white area. Haidar describes the so-called apartheid wall and the fact that you need to get permits to move everywhere if you're Palestinian. So I want to go from that to what do you think then is the solution? Because the way you describe the restrictions on freedom of movement for Palestinians is very reminiscent of what happened here. I want to ask the last question of all of you, but I'm going to start with you, Megan, and then come to you, and then Nathi. Where do we go from here? What is the solution? What can we do, both in South Africa, internationally, and in Palestine and Israel itself?
As a white South African Jew who is an anti-Zionist, I need to hear from the Palestinians, and I will support them.
Thank you. Haidar, what is the solution?
Yeah, but thank you. I mean, I like that answer. I think, look, Palestinian civil society came up with a call in 2005. Look, we've looked at the South African experience and we've learned our lessons. And this is why in 2005 we issued a statement calling on the international community to boycott apartheid Israel, divest from Israel and international companies that benefit from Israel's violation of our basic rights, and imposing sanctions against Israel until, and here is the point that people don't get, until it complies with international law. Now I'm not talking about solutions. I'm talking about the implementation of international law, our right to self-determination, withdrawal of Israel's troops from the Gaza Strip and the West Bank, right of return of Palestinians. I am a refugee. My parents were refugees, from the village of Zarnuga, which was ethnically cleansed in 1948. Both of them died in 2005, dreaming of the day when they would be allowed to return to that village. And ultimately, equality, calling for equality. Now, when you think about it, what is wrong when you call for, implementation of international law? If you do that, you are accused of being anti-Semitic. It's like, when you think about South Africa, it's, when you get rid of apartheid, that means you are being anti-white. Now, it doesn't make sense at all. And I think the international community has a moral responsibility, a real responsibility to side with the Palestinians, to side with the oppressed, not the oppressor, in order to implement international law. And that international law must ultimately lead to one state for all of its citizens.
You have a big challenge in getting now the US in particular to stop supplying the bombs that get dropped on your homes. Exactly. Nathi, one of the things, this is my last question, then we'll open up. One of the illustrations in your book, which I found very moving, was the fact, and Haidar will know this, people, when they were moved in 1948, driven out, took their keys with them because they thought that they would go back at some stage. And that stage hasn't come yet. It's, you know, kind of 70 years later. What do you think, where do we go from here? What do you do as a writer, as an illustrator?
As a writer, as a black writer and illustrator, I will continue to support the Palestinian cause until Palestine is free, and I will continue to use my voice to not only champion the rights of Palestine, but of those oppressed everywhere. And actually tonight we have an exhibition at the Desmond and Leah Tutu House, 6 p.m. sharp, where a group of 21 artists, academics, and writers have come together, and they have used my book as an inspiration to create their own artworks. And we will continue to stand up and move with the people of Palestine wherever they go. I love what Megan said also, that let's rather let a Palestinian tell us, you know, what is the solution for them. And I, as an artist and a writer, will continue to support them.
Thank you, Nathi. Let's open up for questions, see if I can see. Is there a mic somewhere? Thank you. Okay, I see you, like 1, 2, 3 in the front row. I'll take from the second left here, and then you, and then you.
Hi, thank you for that. The question's mostly for Haidar as the Palestinian and the Gazan.
I can't see you, sorry.
That's okay.
Thank you.
That's okay. But whomever else would like to answer it, I'm just, if you would like to speak a little bit about the American response, not just now, but really since the Oslo Accord, since Jimmy Carter, which has become increasingly more draconian. I think, I don't want to say Jimmy Carter was necessarily progressive, but even Ronald Reagan was more progressive than Barack Obama in terms of settlements, in terms of international law. And if you'd just like to reflect on that a little bit.
Yeah.
In fact, I think even Eisenhower was more progressive than Joe Biden, certainly.
Yeah. Should I answer?
Should we take 3 questions and then please? It's one at a time. Okay. Okay. You can.
No. Very, very briefly, because I know we are running out of time.
We've got 17 minutes. 17. Yeah.
You think that's enough? All right. Very.
We're going to be very clever and concise.
Yeah. Jimmy Carter's. The title of Jimmy Carter's book was "Peace, Not Apartheid," and he visited Gaza. I think I met him. It was in 2000, I think it was 2007, I think. And I remember him saying that Palestinians of Gaza are being treated by Israel like, animals in a zoo, trapped, in cages in a zoo. And then he came up with his book, Apartheid, Not Peace. My problem with it was definitely good, but my problem is that the term apartheid was used to describe the form of oppression practiced by Israel against the Palestinians of the Gaza Strip and the West Bank only, not 1948 Palestine. And if you compare that to reports by, as I said, Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch, Israel's B'Tselem, the regime between the Jordan River and the Mediterranean is an apartheid regime. So I think it's very important to understand. Look, the comparison between apartheid, South Africa, and Israel is very valid, but there are differences. In 2006, we had the late Archbishop Desmond Tutu. He visited us also in Gaza. And I remember sitting with him and talking to him. And what he said at the time was very, very important. He said, I can see, it's like a deja vu, he says. It's like, going through a deja vu. But what you are going through is far, far worse than what we had to witness under, the heydays of apartheid. I think, it comes back to your question about, American presidents and Of course, Jimmy Carter is considered the most progressive in a way. I mean, when it comes to the American establishment, there is no hope. Israel would not have been able to carry out all of its crimes against humanity, war crimes, and the ongoing genocide without the direct involvement, I wouldn't say even complicity, of the United States of America. I hope that answers the question in a way.
Let me take the question next, the hand that was right next to you. Yeah.
Okay, my question is, fast forward into the future, hopefully quite soon, when there is a one state and everybody is equal, how do we as an international community put pressure on that one state for true equality, that people, because that the Palestinians aren't left forever as poor relations?
Is your question directed to anyone?
Haidar,
To
of course.
Haidar?
I think
Okay.
probably
yeah.
is the, yes.
Yeah, that's a hypothetical question, definitely, because we used to ask the same question in the 70s and 80s about South Africa. And here we are together. We have a black person sitting there, we have a white person, we have, I don't know, brownish, whatever, I mean, well, you know what I'm saying. And I think, look, it was in 1997 when Edward Said wrote a piece in Al Ahram Weekly, and I think it was republished by the London Review of Books on the one-state solution. All right? Of course, he didn't answer that your question, but later on, you know, some other intellectuals started building on that idea, leading to the formation of the one-state campaign. I am a co-founder of the one-state campaign in Palestine, and we are working on a future constitution. And I tell you, the best constitution that we have come across is the South African constitution. It is the best. It's the most progressive, more than the American. You know, we looked at, America, and United Kingdom doesn't have a constitution. Well, obviously, like Israel, right? It does not have a constitution. So when we look, try to envisage, I myself, if you are asking me about my opinion, there are serious problems in South Africa. There are very serious problems in South Africa, and the compromise was, we don't want to give the same compromises given by the ANC government here in South Africa. We don't want to do, but we are talking about, a political solution, one person, one vote. In the future, what is the international community supposed to do? The international community is supposed to listen to what the oppressed have to say. What do we want? And what we are doing, the one-state solution, this is the last sentence, I'm sorry. I think it's a huge compromise given by the colonized Palestinians to the settlers by granting them equal citizenship.
Okay, is it Pat? Yeah, question next to you. Let me just take, I think Pat had your hand up first and then I'll come to you, all right? Yes, go ahead.
Okay, my question is to Nathi. Are you reaching the schools? Because my concern is the youth. History seems to make no sense to them. Are you is your book going into schools?
So I've been around a few schools in Johannesburg, Durban, and in the beginning in May, I was also here in Cape Town to 2 schools. There are some schools that they are concerned, so they rather not, have such a controversial book or a controversial author, illustrator visit their premises. But for the schools that have been accepting and giving me invitations, I've been attending as many schools as possible. Next week, I'll be attending 2 schools in Johannesburg. And I'm hoping that, more schools can, continue to invite me to talk to children about Palestine. So whenever I go to schools, I'll talk mostly about apartheid to the young ones because, they have no idea what apartheid is. So it makes it an easy conversation to have that. So, yeah, I would love for more schools to open up. But yeah, I have been attending.
Thank you, Nathi. There was a question right at the end, and then I'll come to you.
Just first of all, thank you very much. It's an open book festival, and it's terrific that there is this open conversation, which is very important. But I think one needs to understand that apartheid came to an end not because people suddenly started loving each other. What it came about was that there were two people, two leaders from both sides who realized it was strategic to speak to each other. You can't have a solution if one side determines what they think the solution is. So I think from a practical point of view, peace talks are about seeking peace. And the problem is, in any situation, whether it's Ukraine and Putin, whether it's Israel and Netanyahu, whoever the parties are, when power and politics become the focus, people don't count. And we've got to get everybody to realize that we're talking about humankind. And that's the important principle, not us, them. Othering, unfortunately, is why we go to war. And why, even at schools, you're grown up with a system of othering. It's whether you're white, black, race, religion, gender, gay, not gay, preferences, rich, poor, clever, stupid, as they define that. So othering, so when it comes to education, and in fact, I didn't want to speak politics, I really wanted to address Nathi. The book from an illustration point of view is stunning. But from a fact point of view, political education, like this open festival, needs to give all sides of a story. Otherwise, it's just a political text. So my plea is that in education, we are talking about humankind, about people. Every person lost, whether it's in Israel, in Palestine, in another area, is a mother or a father, a brother or a sister, is a person. It's not just the numbers, but we're talking people.
Thank you. Nathi, would you like to respond to that?
I would like to say that we can, all content is very important. And of course, all sides of the story is very important. But I wanted to tell the story of Palestine because Palestine, like Professor Eid said, doesn't exist. It's invisible. And in a lot of media content that I've been consuming, I wasn't getting the full story of the Palestinian. And I guess the purpose of this book is I wanted to create that gateway for children to learn and know about Palestine. And I will continue to represent those that are oppressed.
Thank you, Nathi. There was a question next to us, and I'll come to you afterwards. Thank you.
Professor, you speak about your dream of a one state of Israelis and Palestinians, but very different to South Africa. There are 9 million Israeli citizens, including Palestinians who have rights and vote in Israel, and 3 million Gazans. So your one state that you foresee, you talk about the settlers not having rights, but in reality, Gazans would not form majority governments. There could never be a government in Israel like the ANC are a majority here. So the apartheid metaphor is very inaccurate. And also, I don't think you've really thought through your plan for a one-state solution. And for Nathi, do you know what the river to the sea is? Is it that the Gazans have the whole land from the river to the sea? And then what happens to the 9 million Israelis? The Russians, the Palestinians? They should all just disappear.
Sorry, we just...
Where should they go
just
back to?
hold
You
on.
talk...
We've conducted so far A very respectful interchange. Let's
and I
continue.
think I'm being respectful in my thing. And you also speak about the settlers from Nakba. So I'm a Lithuanian origin Jewish woman living in South Africa. My grandparents were forced to leave Russia and Vilna because of the pogroms, and they don't, they never said, oh, well, we must go back and take that land because that's where we were from. Borders do change. Borders change over a lifetime. People move, they're forced to settle. Countries' borders change. And when the Oslo Accords happened in 2000, Jews removed bodies out of cemeteries. They really tried and moved. I understand that there are a lot more settlers in the territories now, but just like your students, many of whom are terrorists, who've gone and were part of October 7th, many of whom you say that they're students.
Just hold on a second. Just hang on. Look, do you have a particular question?
Yes, my question is, what do you see for this one state that you speak of?
Okay. Let's listen to the answer.
I just feel we've had a one-sided rhetoric here all morning.
But would you please? I'm going to ask you to answer the question.
Okay. I have a hearing problem. I didn't hear the question. Okay.
The question is, how do you, if I'm summing it up incorrectly, please let me know, how do you see a one-state solution with the numbers, the proportion of population that there is now? Is that correct, more or less? Okay.
I think I've answered this question. I think, it is based on equality. And I said the most progressive constitution that we've looked at is the South African constitution, unless you are racist. If you are a racist, you don't accept that. That's my answer.
Okay. Thank you. Let me take somebody who hasn't been, I think, have you? Okay. All right, let me take, I will come to you now. So just, okay, go ahead. And please say who the question is for.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
To Haidar, thank you. You were speaking earlier about facts on the ground, and there are the facts on the ground. And I want to ask you about language that's used out there, because we can get the witness accounts, you tell us. And I also believe that, for example, when using language, instead of saying something's controversial when it speaks about the truth, or so-called apartheid when it is apartheid, or described as genocide when it is genocide. So what I find is there's a war out there above your facts on the ground, that is the propaganda, and that Nathi is doing his job in his cartoon of books and things. But how do we deal with the propaganda and the language? The fact that when somebody fights for their rights, they're called a terrorist. When another country has a genocide, they are defending themselves. The language. And when Palestinians are massacred, newspapers are told not to use the word massacre and to call it killed. And when an Israeli person is killed, it's a massacre and it's brutal. So there's the propaganda around language which colors the facts for people who are trying to learn right now.
I'm sorry, could you get to your question, please? Because there are other people.
My question is just about the fight against propaganda and thank you.
No, I completely agree. I think it's important. The language as a Palestinian civil society now, all right, away from ideology, racist ideologies, etc., the language we are using right now in Palestine, and especially since 2005 when we issued our first call for BDS, boycott, divestment, and sanctions, is the language of international law and human rights. And people need to understand Israel's oppression of the Palestinians is not only apartheid, it's a multi-tiered system of oppression. The occupation of the Gaza Strip and the West Bank is illegal according to international law. Right of return is based on United Nations Resolution 194. As for apartheid, the third form of oppression, now the international community has admitted that Israel is an apartheid state. And I think it's, if you want to know, I mean, everybody is on Facebook. Everybody has a TikTok account, is on Twitter. And if people follow what is happening on social media, and look, what is happening right now in the universities, intifada, in the States, in Europe, etc., etc., the information of these students, the information these students are getting, not based on propaganda, not based on CNN, BBC, etc., on social media. If you want to know the truth and facts on the ground and what is the right language to use based on human rights for all, I mean, let me emphasize that, you can do that. And I think we are getting there.
I have been told by Mervyn it's time, but there was a hand here. Did you have your hand up? No, there was, I think I saw one here. I'll take one more question. So let me, and you had, if that one was before, then okay, we'll take two more questions, you, and then we have to stop. So yeah.
Thank you.
Mindful of the time, please make it a question, and try to make it as concise as possible.
I'll keep it short.
Yeah, thank you.
Why do you think that especially the rich countries refuse or fail to condemn the brutality of the Israel regime?
Who is your question for?
Anybody.
Okay. Megan, you take it.
I don't know. I mean, I have no idea why the rich countries refuse to acknowledge the brutality of the Israeli regime.
If I may come in, I mean,
please.
I don't know either. But, look, the countries that support Israel, notice it's the colonial West. The countries that have supported the genocide so far, I mean, Australia, you know, we are talking about settler colonialism. No wonder. Australia, of course, America, Canada, United Kingdom. If you look at the history of these countries, history of settler colonialism, and that's very, very important. But also, if you look at the United States of America, you know the lobbies in the United States of America. I mean, it's very easy. People who are following the elections, etc. And the third point is that Israel is a colonial project implanted in the heart of the Middle East, in the heart of the Arab world in order to protect the interests of the colonial West.
Okay, let's take the last question, which was up there, very last.
Hello. Yes, thank you. A question for Dr. Haidar. My name is Marwan Diab. I come from Gaza.
Oh, my friend. Hello.
Yes. And Haidar is luckier than me because you moved only 4 times within Gaza when you were displaced. I moved 6 times when I was in Gaza, unfortunately, within 2 months of being there. The question is, how did you feel when you left Gaza, when you left people behind you being killed and murdered and dehumanized? How did you feel? I have my own feelings, but I just would like to hear from you.
Could I just ask you, it's a bit interesting that when did you leave?
I left Gaza end of November, so I carry a Canadian passport, so I was lucky to get out. And by the way, I have lots of Jewish friends from the States, United States, who were able to get my family out, and they have paid for them $5,000 each member to get out of Gaza. And we had a family conflict with saying that those guys are Jewish, they are getting you out, they want to evacuate the land and blah, blah, blah. I said, no, those are my friends and they would like to rescue my family from the suicide, the genocide that they are taking place. So I left, I was living with my son and personally exposed to injuries. And when I moved from one place to another, the last one was Rafah. So the question, how did you feel, Dr. Haidar, when people behind you told you, please don't leave us, take us with you, give us a South African passport, give us any passport. How did you feel, please?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Well, I must admit survival's guilt complex. I mean, I'm still living with that survival's guilt complex. But at the same time, as I said to you, you know, we had 5 massacres before that. 2008, 2012, 14, 21, etc., etc., and I never left. The thing, honestly, that made me reconsider is I have 2 little kids now. And this is the reason why I decided to leave. And the other point is that apartheid Israel started targeting activists, academics, Dr. Adnan al-Bursh, who's a close friend of mine. He was the head of the orthopedic department at the Shifa hospital. He was arrested from a Shifa hospital by Israeli terrorists, tortured to death. All right? And now every single time I think about these people, I have that guilt complex. I am conscious of that. And now, after 10 months, I'm still trying to deal with the trauma. My personal trauma, but also my 2 little kids, 7 and 6 years old. So this is how I've been, dealing with it, yeah. And at the same time, calling every single day, I'm sure you are going through the same thing, calling the family every single day just to make sure that they are still alive.
I think on that rather somber note, we need to end. And I want to say a very big thank you to our 3 guests, Haidar, Eid, Megan Choritz, and Nathi Ngubane, for their thoughtfulness, their scholarship, their creativity, and being able to facilitate and to inform a very difficult conversation. That said, I also want to thank the audience for really listening and engaging in a way that I think has been, it shows that we have a long road to walk, but I think that this has been a very helpful session. So thank you to everybody.